Well, then when I went to ASIS, I learned about the certification, started a network with professionals, and quickly learned that as a law enforcement officer, I knew very little when it came to security in general. And it was disturbing what had been taught in regards to residential security. Got my CPP, studied for that in 98, got it in December of 1998, and since 2001 have been the certification coordinator here.
You got your CPP my rookie year as a cop.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the year I graduated from the police academy, was 98.
So we going to talk about my age
well,
now,
I'm just saying. I'm here for the dick joke. So the thing is I just wanted to point that out because I'm considered the old guy around here. But there you go. Go ahead, take some shots.
Yeah.
You or him?
Go for either one.
I'm okay for right now.
Okay, go. Keep going, Mike.
So got to work with a lot of professionals and was really, and I knew that I'd found my niche. The certification test at the time I took it, Josh, in 96 wasn't nearly the test it is today. But in 2001, started studying when I was at the Overland Park Police Department, and in 2011, I retired. Went to work for Midwest Alarm Systems. I couldn't find a director job of security. That's really what I wanted because I didn't have any leadership experience. And so that was a hindrance in my career, and I thought, well, I'm not going to get that in the private sector now, so I thought the best thing I could do is learn more about access control, video management, and things of that nature. So I took a job with this security systems integrator, and I learned a bunch. I said I learned a lot. I didn't say I made much money because my nickname was 50 Cent. And that'll give you an idea how successful I was in that profession.
We're not going to talk about that, though.
I appreciate that because it's embarrassing. So, but I did learn a lot. And the employer I work now, I'm the director of security at the Stowers Institute for Medical Research. And they happened, at the time I applied, they were in desperate need of a security system upgrade. And I had bid that job. So I knew exactly what they needed, the route I would take it, and how to work around some of the bidding, the budget items, and how to save costs and integrate a more comprehensive system that would enhance officers' response. Something of what Titan does a very good job of with all your remote monitoring and the response and things along those lines. So this year I start my 24th year as the certification chair, and Josh, you know about the CPP study group. We're going to kick that off on February 20th. And since that time, ASIS International has gone to tremendous lengths to make the certification relevant in today's job market through some of the partnerships that they've developed over the course of that last 20 years that I've been teaching this, helping assist other professionals gain the certification. So that's me in a nutshell. That's my career. I found a passion for it. Have mentored and helped a lot of security professionals get their CPPs, just like Josh here.
So did you attempt to help Josh? Because we all know that's a little bit of a struggle. So
Josh ought to be an example. Josh ought to be an example of somebody that can, there's hope for me if I'm going to look to take the test. But let me kid you not. In all seriousness, it's a difficult test.
Oh yeah,
it's not easy, and Josh needs to be commended on the work that he put in. So, a few years back, ASIS International partnered with the association, or the association. No, what is it? It's ACE. Oh, Association of Council. Now I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, it's an accreditation through universities for individuals that are looking to get enhanced educational opportunities. Mm-hmm. ACE partnered with ASIS International to review their certifications. And what they did, what the program did with ASIS International, is that if you had an ASIS certification and you elected to go get a master's degree or a bachelor's, that certification would be applied towards credits that you could get credit for the work that you've already accomplished. But when they examined the CPP certification, ACE determined it was the equivalent of 18 credit hours of master college coursework.
Wow.
18 hours.
Yeah.
Now, since then, they recently dropped that program because what's unfortunate is a lot of ASIS members had elected, weren't pursuing it, and ASIS had to put money forth, and they just weren't getting the return on that investment. But I always go back to that because it demonstrates the amount of discipline it takes to obtain the certification, because you're looking at material from the protection of asset manuals to the study guides and to the guidelines of over 2,500 pages of material.
I can say I commend Chief Leon for getting the certification and the dedication he did and everything, because there were days here where we would watch him study and he would put himself in a separate office and close the door. And it was all I could think about. I looked at one of the books after about a week of him reading it, and I was just curious, and he let me look at one of them. And just the amount, 2,500 pages of that, I could believe 18 credit hours for a master's degree, absolutely, because some of it was just made me feel dumb. And I just looked at it, it was like, wow.
It's a lot. I mean, there's no doubt, and it's such a blanket of everything that is security. I mean, everything from a sensor to the deployment of officers to incident-based report writing, and goes on and on and on to executive protection. I mean, just
Physical security,
investigations.
Management.
It sure seems to me that as I was reading it, that you're going to be one of three guys or girls when you come out with that thing. It seems to me like in the CPP world that you have CPPs that probably fall more into technical security and physical security. You have CPP folks that fall more into their specialty is forensics and investigations, and then you have ones that fall into security management. The security management is definitely, I go, oh, hi. Yeah, I've been doing that for a while. And so that one made a ton of sense to me. But you take somebody like Terry, Terry really,
Terry, clarify, we're talking about Terry.
Yeah, that really, it seems that if you talk to him, the waters he swims the most comfortably and would be the more physical and technical. Yeah. But I think it still makes you learn a little bit about everything or checks your learning on everything that you think that you know. I don't equate it to any different to when I was a police officer, when Mike was on the job, that we had guys that were really good at traffic. We had guys but they still had to know domestic violence law. They still had to know this. They still had to know that. When I started as a rookie, I hated accidents. Last thing in the world I wanted to do. By the time I was at the end of my career, I loved accidents. It didn't bug me at all, And Shawnee Mission Parkway and Mission Road during during rush hour traffic will teach you how to do some accidents real quick. Oh, yeah. And but that's what I put CPP to. It's that when you come out of the police academy, we're all cops, but all those cops are going to find something that they're really good at. Yeah, and I think that you got to have the basic knowledge, the blanket of everything that is security to pass the CPP, and then I think you're going to probably fall into what is more feels like home to you. That's how it struck me.
So for those that aren't familiar with the CPP exam, Coop, it's more geared towards managers. The other thing, it covers seven different disciplines.
Yeah.
So it applies to a broad base of professions within the security industry or the security profession itself. Unlike some of these, like I know the hospital industry has one specific for them.
Yeah.
And for professionals that are looking to expand their career, I try to push them towards the CPP because it's more broad-based. It's more general in nature.
Yeah.
You talked physical security, things like that. The new big chapter within the POAs now is the business principles and practices, which was written by Professor Christopher Walker from Texas Christian University. Had an opportunity to sit down and chat with Chris, a phenomenal individual. Unfortunately, he recently passed here just a few years ago. But I had that opportunity to talk with him about rolling the security programs into the business schools, because that's really what it is. Security is business.
It is, and then that ESRM piece, that enterprise security risk management piece, that's
new. That was just new in 2021.
and what that is, Josh, is identifying the assets of the enterprise. The enterprise for us is Titan. What are our assets? Who are the stakeholders in it, and how do we go best about protecting them? And but if I'm going to do that with a school and do a risk assessment with the school, that school's the enterprise. And what are the assets? Well, the assets in the school are the kids. It's the kids and the staff and the faculty, and then you can move on to secondary assets. You can move on to data and things like that. But it really, he's right. It's just you gotta be a Swiss Army knife of security. You really have to know a little bit about all of the different disciplines that he's talking, including business.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an entire business principles book where I'm learning I didn't know what gross profit was. I would hear Smith and Kyle talk about that stuff. And I was at some meeting with Kyle, my boss, the director of operations. And he brought up some business term, and it's got some letters and stuff. And I knew what it was. I go, God damn it, Kyle! You made me learn this. Now I know exactly what it is that you're talking about. My brain just used to be song lyrics and tunes, and now it's this stuff. And it really makes you learn even the things that that aren't really in your wheelhouse, and how they affect security. How
everything ties together.
Yeah. Yeah, a balance sheet affects security. We think that as financial guys, but it affects security.
Wholeheartedly.
But when you read that text, one of the ones that they reference quite a bit is Marilyn Garcia's book, The Physical Design and Evaluation of Protection Systems. And so usually to summarize her book, it's protection system is based off the people, procedures, the equipment, and this is the one thing that's rarely discussed, available resources. And that's when you start talking about budgets and things of that nature. But Chris, in his business principles and practices, also is important for the security practitioner to understand what is the mission of the organization, what is the strategy that they're incorporating.
It's a huge
and,
one.
And what is the culture. And you tell me how many times law enforcement, when they come out and they do an assessment, even take any of those things into consideration.
They just don't.
They don't.
No.
It's a big component that Chris goes into great depth in his book on business principle and practices, why that is so important. If you don't understand the culture and the strategy and the mission of an organization, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah.
And so you must understand that, and those are some of the questions that you have to ask. So when we do our mentoring of law enforcement, or military personnel when they're trying to transition to the private sector, we emphasize them, and this is what we get.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's crucial.
Yeah. And you're also talking about guys, you're talking about cops with, city tax revenue coming in, or county tax revenue coming in, or state tax revenue, or federal tax revenue coming in. When you're talking about doing security for a business on the private sector, it's a totally different, that's a totally different animal, and it does require, by far, it requires a different scope,
Think about how law enforcement's trained for a minute, and take that and compare it to the exam that you just took. Law enforcement's trained to respond to an incident, conduct an investigation, develop a suspect, and then get information or evidence to fulfill a prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you look at their recommendations when it comes to security, it follows that same pattern. What do they like to recommend? Alarms, cameras, things of that nature. Yeah, those are vital components of a security system, but they don't address some of the other matters that are addressed in order to make that security strategy effective, cost effective.
Yeah. Cost. And I mean, there's a business continuity piece that
Yep.
law enforcement doesn't think about as much, to where how do we get this back up and running, as palatable, That's why when we had that outage on Microsoft, remember that morning where it was down, and we really didn't have a plan for that. And I said, well, we got a guinea pig now. I got everybody I made you guys start filling out, creating flow sheets. Okay, well, if this goes down, how do we schedule? How do we do
Where do we find this information? If this goes down, what's missing here? How do we track these people? How do we know for sure? What do we do? We came up with, I think we had 4 game plans by the end of the next 4 hours.
That was probably midway through my reading of that stuff, and I stole that from the business continuity section of those manuals. And it was how do we get things back up and running, and efficiently.
But Josh, you knew where to find it.
Yeah.
And that's why when we talk about studying in the study session, we talk about going directly to the original source material. We're not. There's a lot of chapters out there that just go from the study guidelines and the flashcards, and then those people are just looking to quickly get the test. But it's not going to benefit them in the long term, because they're not going to know where that information is.
Yeah.
Because if I ask Josh Leon, where can I find this information? You're going to go, oh, this book.
Yep.
This page.
Yep.
This chapter.
Quote it. This chapter. Quote it.
Yeah.
Put it in there. Why? To mitigate your risk, because you know what? And when it goes to court, they're going to be asking those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And you heard me say this analogies. You have to pass the bar, but then after you pass the bar, which our bar is CPP, but once you pass that, you got to remember the book to go find that stuff in, because you're not going to retain it all.
Now that brings up a good question about the CPP and what's a certification.
Right.
What that entails, as opposed to like a certificate of completion.
Yeah.
So the certificate of completion is still important for us, because we need to continue. We need to get every 3 years. Once you pass the exam, every 3
60,
years,
right?
You get 60 what we call CPEs, or continuing professional education units. Now, the certificate of completion basically says you sat there and you attended this class. That's all it is. You can get it for just sitting there and falling asleep and being on your phone. But it's still important that for us, that we've got to obtain it, be there, and get those continuing CPEs. We got to get 60 within 3 years. The certification that ASIS has mandates that every 3 years that we continually go on with continuing education credits, that we're demonstrating that we have a knowledge in the field of our discipline, and that we're continually learning, and we got to renew that every 3 years.
And to tell you, he sticks on me about that. Just so now, I just passed mine in October, and I'm at 13%.
And what do I tell you?
Completed. You say stay after it.
Stay after it, record it, and document it. You know, I can't tell you how many people have lost their CPP certification because they could not document anything they had done. Because when it comes to that 3 years, Coop, they're going, Mike, you have that material? I said, no, I already sent it to you.
Yeah.
It's on you.
So mine,
so
mine, a lot of the ones I've done have been webinars that I'm sitting there learning on, and they actually send me a certificate, and I've got a little folder, so I pull the certificate over, put it in that folder right there.
And that's your recording.
And then I go and I wait about 48 hours, and then I go check my certification, and I can see when they have credited me for it. And I go do a quality control check just to make sure that they're giving me that.
I said that was going to be my question on that. When you say record it, that's that recording is getting that certificate and making sure that it's applied to your. And there's a live tracking for that on the.
Yep.
Some
do it for you. Some you have to submit.
Now, there are some local chapter members. I always encourage them to turn in all their CPEs and then have them submit them into ASIS International. Because here's what they do for you: they keep them all for as long as you're a member.
Yeah.
You go into court,
they've got it.
You can print it out, show it out. Here's all my continuing ed credits. Pretty powerful when you're able to bring that document. Say you're doing a deposition as an expert witness, and I've done many. You present that material, it's pretty substantial.
Carries some weight.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
That it's the way that you achieve it. You can do a certain amount through classes that you take. You can do a certain amount from conferences you attend. You can get certain by being one of the biggest ones is if you're published. I think is if I remember looking at the guide.
Or you
right?
teach, or you
or
lecture.
You teach.
There's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
Ways that you volunteer as a chapter representative or a board member or something along those lines for ASIS International. Any other security organization, you can submit CPEs for that.
It's showing that you went and got your, like I use the bar as, lawyers. It's showing that you went and passed the bar, but you actually went to court and kept using it.
Right. It'd be the same as like doing I know lawyers do it.
Well, you're a firearms instructor. It would be like you getting your firearms instructor.
And you're doing your continuation training.
But you never teach a class.
Yeah.
You can go around saying you're a firearms instructor.
But if you don't teach,
but if you don't
useless.
teach a class, that you're not worth your weight.
Yeah.
You actually go make mistakes and teach and learn.
Apply the knowledge.
Apply the knowledge. Yeah.
Learn more and continue that education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, fantastic. I know we were saying that we talked a little bit about this being the gold standard and some of the stuff that comes behind it. One of the things when I look at this and I see the value and the importance behind it because I got to read a couple of the books and I've listened to you and go through the training material and everything. What makes this so gold standard for security? Why does when someone looks at CPP, that's when they see those three letters, why is that so important?
Well, let me just take one step back for a minute.
Sure.
One of the things you're starting to see a lot more of is that the CPP is either preferred or required in some of the director managerial jobs that you're seeing across the country. That's the other reason why it's the gold standard. Why is it recognized as that? It's primarily the amount of material and the amount of studying that you have to do that demonstrates the 7 different disciplines that you had to engage in to understand, comprehend it. But more important, and Josh can attest to this, recently taken the test. It's not about memorizing anything. It's about Josh, you tell me. You're the most.
You just said it best. I remember when I called you and I said because I was traveling to St. Louis, I only made it to the very first study group. I did the rest on my own, but I would check in with Mike and just say, hey, this is what I'm doing. How do you feel? Do you feel like I'm on the right track here? And we'd kind of talk through that. One of the things he told me is don't get too tripped up by the details, meaning don't get too, I guess finite might be the word that I'm looking for here. Don't get too granular, more of see the big picture,
Broad strokes versus fine.
Yeah. And well, it's because you're picking up whole sections. You're picking up and like he said, it's 7 different trains of thought, business trains of thought, physical security trains of thought, crisis management trains of thought, and it's picking up that, and I think it's sticking to big principles and the big principles of a security professional of protecting that asset, identifying the asset, and who's got something to lose.
Well, you do a base version of it when I sit here and think about everything. You do a base version of it when we get a new client. The first thing, one of the first questions you ask them is, "What are your 3 biggest pain points?"
I actually say, "What's pissing you off?"
Yeah, and so that's that base level. There is you're getting that base information of their core values and trying to figure out how
but make no
applies.
mistake, you're going to run into a question that says, "What's a bistatic sensor?" And I mean, there's some of that in there. There's no doubt. But to me, I found that the most beneficial piece of preparing myself for the test was knowing that. It's an equation, okay? It always drove my old man nuts that I didn't like math and that I didn't do equations. But I know that custody plus interrogation equals Miranda. It's an equation, okay? So same in risk management and security management. Identifying the asset, identifying who it matters to, and then reacting appropriately. And those are equations that this pea brain can actually understand.
And it's getting that same for the CPP.
But
Getting
Coop,
those
you
basic-
got to remember, we're talking about 2,500 pages of material.
Yeah.
All right. What Josh was saying was, and I'd rephrase it, is they're looking for you to apply the principles in those 7 different disciplines to a scenario. So, and how many times we tell you, Josh, there's going to be 2 correct answers you can toss out. There'll be 2 other questions that'll be probably correct, but it's which one's going to be the most correct.
Yeah.
because they're looking for you to apply some of those principles. Now, when we start talking about lighting, or they want a color rendering index, and or what's a foot candle, or something along, or lumens.
Yeah.
You're not really going to need that. Sometimes the foot candle issue comes up, or the different types of lighting, halogen, metal halide, low pressure, high pressure sodium, any of those types of lights that are available out there. Sometimes those prop up, but those are anomalies in the test. Don't focus on that.
No.
It's the basic principles of applying those strategies to mitigate risk to your employer, your client, whomever.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. The little real finite, knowing this sensor, knowing that we're very few and far between. To me, it was much more of, and that's a great point of applying it to a scenario. Whether you're talking about an adversary path or any of those other types of principles that were in there. It really does. It makes you think of things from further out. And I told you guys this, if you go to a crime scene, guy, I said, if you were at a homicide scene, where's going to be the first picture you take? Well, if you talk to a lot of guys who work for us, they say, oh, well, the weapon or something like that. Nah, if you go to a crime scene, guy, they're going to start
all the way
way
out
out there. Yeah, and they're going to start working their way in. And that's one of the things that, when Mike and I were rookies, that you're putting up tape and trying not to touch too many things or do anything like that. But you see those detectives show up and they're way out there and they just start working their way in. And in CPP type thinking, you might be way out there working your way in, or you may be right in here working your way out.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's those two different ways of looking at things.
Okay.
But the other thing is, what it helps you manage is that you're not going to eliminate all the risk, and that you have to take into account what is the organization's strategy, mission, and objectives.
Yeah, culture. Yeah,
Yeah, and culture, and what are the available resources. So and this is what law enforcement needs to get out of the assessment process in issuing security recommendations, because their approach, along with, now we have a local DHS agent that I adhere Dorley, and he's extremely smart. But they teach those agents to do what? To take the approach, there's a terrorist behind every corner. And the assessments they give are so large, so big. I'll never, one of them came and did an assessment. One of them came to the assessment, and I had him come out, and and I think the world of him. But he says, Mike, this is where I got to go with Jack Bauer on you. I'm going.
That's the guy from 24.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got that reference.
I don't need Jack Bauer, because one, the culture and the organization and the mission of the organization wasn't going to allow me to go Jack Bauer.
Right.
Because there's other things that you got to remember. What are the aesthetics that you're presenting? Because that was important where I'm at. Because it's an educational institution, and you've got to ask how many funds am I working with?
Yeah.
And that's where law enforcement and the government officials, they miss that part of it. And it's important that you take that into consideration, because you're going to be placing risk, and then it's up to the client or to the employer to make those decisions where they're going to allocate those resources to.
I'm doing one with some folks right now, and I absolutely know, just because of the entity that it is, that the budget's going to be tough. It's just going to be tough.
Is that something?
And so one of the things and you'll remember this term from the reading too, and now they use it several different ways in the reading of those manuals. But one of the things that I'm going to tell this entity when I kind of give my considerations is I'm going to say, hey, let's show continuous improvement. And I think if you can show that a continuous improvement with a limited budget, I think that shows due diligence and shows at least an attempt, but he's absolutely, when you're talking about entities that do not have a steady fund of taxpayer money coming in, it's tough.
I would say that's where you were talking about funds and allocating those resources. Something that I think about when I think government versus a private company. The government has, I wouldn't say an unlimited fund, but they've got a very large fund versus a small business that's looking, hey.
Go talk to a guy who flips houses.
Yeah.
Go talk to a guy who flips houses. He's going to be like, I ain't going to make any money off that. I'm not going to make money off that. I'm not going to make money off that, because he's trying to do a job here it's not free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you go into court and you do an expert witness testimony, what you're helping the client to do is to mitigate the risk, as you said, Josh, over a period of time, but to let them know that they felt comfortable like they're making some progress, or they've made that decision, they've identified what the risk is, but given what information they have before them, it doesn't seem to make sense to put an investment in there. As long as they can say that they've pointed, that they made a justification based off knowledge, it may not eliminate the risk, but it certainly should reduce it to some degree. That they considered it, they looked at it, it's like, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, because it truly becomes, at what point?
Yeah.
Are we risking our business
Right.
over this? And there's a viability issue that you have to consider.
There's a pretty famous saying in this kind of realm that I've noticed is, well, do you know how much that's going to cost us if we do that? And the response is, do you know how much it's going to cost you if you don't?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's kind of a big saying in these parts when it comes to that. And it's tough when you got people who have a limited budget and you want to, that's why when I'm dealing with potential clients like that, I'm trying to be as empathetic as I can because I know they're in a tough spot.
Because they still need to make money and
Yes.
remain profitable
Yes.
and to pay employees and,
Yep.
and get benefits. Because
Yep.
at some point, the product that they're putting out is at a cost point that's attractive to their customers. If they raise the cost, then they risk business.
Losing the
It
customers.
is a difficult decision
Yep.
for them.
Yeah.
And that's where we help them move forward.
Yeah.
So-
And to his point, if you own this property here, there's different ways that you can tackle it, and there's different things that you can do, whether you want to, work on natural surveillance and things that might not be as costly, but if you have the budget and more boots on the ground and things. So there's little pieces of that I had no idea of. So if you go out here on our little pond that's out here in front of the buildings and go sit on one of those benches, one of the guys was with me, I think it was McFarland. And he sat on one of the benches out there by the pond. He goes, that's the most uncomfortable bench that I've ever sat on in my life. And that's actually an aspect of CPTED, of crime prevention through environmental design. And what you're doing, the crime you're preventing is loitering.
Well,
and
you see
you're
that-
preventing trespassing because, yes, that somebody might want to sit on that bench.
They're not gonna
but
stay long.
They're not going to want to stay long.
Yeah. I mean, you see that all over cities, though. Cities are starting to take that into the building of roadways and stuff like that, or parks where they don't want somebody sleeping overnight. They'll build the benches to where it's uncomfortable to lay down on, or you can't lay down on,
Yeah.
or under overpasses and stuff like that. They'll put
Those big red balls in front of Target are not there just as pretty red balls in front
Yeah.
of Target. They're there for a reason, and there's there's kind of a bollard principle there, but that's all from that stuff, and it's from people looking at things through different scopes instead of just putting meatheads with guns and vests and stuff in front of a business. They're looking at it in different.
How's another way that we can secure this without putting that armed face there or that? Okay. So, kind of taking that in, it's a lot. When you're looking at CPP, how does it change your aspect when you're looking at policies and procedures for not just clients but where you work? So how does it apply to that?
Oh, and all my policies and procedures, I use that source material and document and justify the measures that were taken. All my SOPs and all the policies I write also have documentation where I got these ideas from. And a lot of them are from the guidelines and standards. Well, for example, our workplace violence policy that we're getting roll out at the institute where I'm employed is solely sourced off of OSHA's workplace violence guidelines. Those are guidelines, and they're not standards, but it's a government-issued documentation. But then the standard that's actually issued by ASIS International in cooperation with SHRM, when it was originally written in 2011, is an actual standard. Now, there are differences between standards and guidelines, which is important to understand. Because the standards issued by ASIS International are also supported and documented by the American National Standards Institute, which is also kind of a subset of the International Standards Organization, ISO.
So, yeah.
So, and you learn that too in the CPP exam.
Burns, on the camera side of things was down downstairs talking about UL this and UL that. I never knew what the hell he was talking about. UL is Underwriters Laboratories. Yeah. And so if you build a safe, you've got to meet their standards. Yeah, and they're kind of the governing body of that. But I never knew what the hell Burns was talking about, the UL stuff. And now I do.
Look at you now.
So you bring up safes, Josh. What are the different types of safes? Do you remember?
Yeah.
I didn't expect him to get quizzed.
So, he's screwing with me. And it's on the section I was the worst
Now you
at,
passed
too.
it. I expect all that to go out the window.
Don't make us look bad.
No.
So basically,
this becomes important.
It does because there's certain safe guideline standards, whatever blanket it falls under, that is for protection against theft, but not protection against fire. Yeah, and there's a difference there, and that would definitely be something. And there's a difference between a safe and a vault. And that's something that you would have to go look at. I just sent a client an example of something as benign as a stairwell. Okay, well, if there's in a stairwell, most people can't see what's on the other side of the stairs, but they construct stairs now that's got the holes in between them to where you're taking away an ambush point by having that visual, that natural surveillance. That's where that comes from. But no, he's right. Everything from a safe to a vault to when you're talking about in court. When you're talking about, you said I protected this item in this safe in court, there's going to be an attorney or there's going to be somebody like him that's going to say, let me see your safe. And let me see, if your safe was up to...
and what UL standards you have listed on that safe. But, you talk about safe, you're talking about fire safes.
Yep.
And then what do you need to know about fire safes? Well, you got to protect your documentations in there because what happens in a fire? Those walls are filled with a moisture barrier that once that heats up, it dumps a bunch of moisture into the safe's contents itself to keep those items from burning. But it's going to be wet. So you got to take precautions to protect your documents that you might have in there from being wet. Then on the physical security side of safes, you can get some that are more robust to resist penetration. But if it weighs less than 750 pounds, then criteria calls that you must anchor it to the floor. If it's more than that, then you're free to let it sit on the floor itself. So there's just those little modifications that help you understand. And you can get both a fire safe, protection safe built into the same unit. But those become extremely expensive.
Yeah.
And they have a limited lifetime on the fire safes because that content eventually dries up, and at which you'll have to replace it.
And to Mike's point, that could attach to your insurance requirements. Insurance, whoever's insuring your business may require you to have UL approved or UL standardized certain items. They definitely could. And if you didn't, they might not live up to that policy. It's
now,
tough.
Josh and I may not know all the standards, but we know where to go find them.
I know where to go find it.
Yeah. I knew that just from Chief Leon here giving me a brief overview of everything. I knew it was detailed, and I knew that there was tons of information and stuff that you'd have to know. And I just the detail that goes into this and how it starts so broad and it can just instantly. All of a sudden, now you're into the weeds in it, and you're looking at URL certifications for stuff, and that's crazy. That's really cool.
Ask him that one. I'd like to hear his thoughts on that one.
Which one?
This trends.
The first one?
No, just the overall trends.
Trends in the future of security?
Yep.
Okay. So for CPP certifications, for preparing professionals to handle emerging threats, cyber attacks, or insider threats, anything like that.
Well, I think you're seeing that now a lot in the school security and threat assessments, and even in the workplace violence. That the security professional of the day is going to have to be more attuned in identifying targeted violence, like in workplace violence, school shootings, and things like that. Information security, we're probably going to be more involved. I work a lot with IT. That's not my expertise, but I work with them on managing, the access control of the building. Is it going to go to biometrics and things of those natures, that nature? It's all over the map, Coop. Where it's trending.
I walked into a client and they had, kind of a badging system for visitors and things like that. And I looked at them and I said, who audits that of who used to have a badge, who shouldn't have a badge anymore? And their eyes got that big. And they go, I say, yeah, we probably need to talk.
Oh, and the other big field, executive protection.
Sure.
Yeah.
So in your readings,
Yeah.
and I don't want to put you on my, but what's the biggest challenge in executive protection? Convincing the client themselves that they need protection.
That they need it.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
they need it.
Yeah.
Or organizations that go way overboard, and is the program sustainable?
Yeah.
So that comes down to the financial again.
Because, or there's a
There's a quality of life piece there too.
yes.
Yeah.
That's
You
fair.
could have an executive that does not want a detail on them at all times. It makes them, it's a different kind of life if you're living that kind of life.
Claustrophobic feeling.
But after the United Healthcare incident, holy smokes.
It exploded.
Yeah. Here's this executive who in broad daylight in New York City gets whacked out, and
And that executive protection is a whole other discipline.
Yeah.
In and of itself.
that's a section.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Full
there's a
section.
section in it.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, and it's everything from, I think they call it arm's length protection, and
Yep.
to outer and to forward. So you're our executive, and Mike and I know that you're going to New York. And Mike and I are on the outer realms of executive protection. He and I are in New York a week before you are. He and I are looking at your hotel before you're even on a plane to it. He and I are looking at your paths that you're going to take to your event before you've even been there. And it is definitely a different way of looking at the world.
Here's another one that is near and dear to my heart that I've researched for 20 years. What happened here recently in Kansas City that made a lot of headlines? It's the homes that were burglarized by Travis Kelce. And
There you go.
Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
Residential security.
Yep.
Now that's where I got my start, and I would tell you that our industry, the security industry, has done a shameful job in that particular discipline, because from law enforcement to other security professionals, if I asked you, Coop, and to you, if somebody wanted to address the security of their home, what's the first thing they turn to?
An alarm system, I would think.
Yes, you're right. What's the one question a lot of these professionals don't ask? What are you trying to protect?
Yeah.
And if you had to guess, what do you think it is?
Most people?
Yeah, the family.
Yeah.
Family and kids. Well, what is it you need to gravitate to? You need to address the physical security of the home first and foremost.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. That's one of the things I learned in all my research of 20 years. But when you look at, who's been on the forefront of recommending the security strategies in residences? It's been law enforcement, because they're in uniform, they're responding to a crime scene. The residents expect them to be the experts in security since they're handling these situations. But then what does law enforcement do? They revert to their training, respond to an incident, conduct an investigation, develop a case for prosecution, and go arrest the perpetrator. My question to you is, how does that protect the resident? Because one of the things you learn about burglary is that the psychological impact that it has on the victims is horrifying. Now, law enforcement treats it as what? Property crime.
Property crimes. Yeah.
They don't put much investment into it.
Yeah.
The alarm system for those people that want to protect their family is only going to let them know somebody's already gotten in.
Yeah.
The reason the physical security doesn't get any emphasis is when you do a cost-benefit analysis of putting the physical security in over an alarm system, you're going to save money and it's going to be more effective. It's not dependent on electricity. It doesn't make the lights and sirens. It can be aesthetically pleasing, but the problem is there's no money in it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get pushed.
And also, when you're talking 90% of kick-in burglaries take less than a minute, 2 minutes, and they couldn't give a shit less about alarms, dude.
Yeah.
They just couldn't. Yeah.
I work with the property crime victims, and they're horrified. And you know what a lot of them end up doing?
Moving.
Moving. Because they're scared to be in their own home.
Yeah.
Move to a different area.
Yeah, and yet the physical security, addressing the physical security, is hard to sell because one, the residents are going to spend a lot of money on something they can't see, that's pretty static, and it's just not promoted. But yet, if you, probably in 2005, police departments were beginning to roll into what we called a verified response. And the reason for that is why? What percentage of alarms are false? 99%.
If I had to guess, I'd say high 90s.
Yeah.
It's been that way for decades. But yet when these agencies were talking about canceling response to unverified alarms, who showed up? Homeowners.
Yeah.
They had alarm systems like, you're not coming to our alarm anymore? And there was political pressure for them to respond.
The only alarms that we would get excited about that we would hear come over the air were glass breaks. When we heard glass breaks, if we heard those pop off on the radio, Mike was dispatched through OP, but I was dispatched through the county. But those would catch my ear. You have to go to the alarms anyways. But when you're talking major metropolitan cities of St. Louis, where I'm at now, and some other places, the police are not showing up for those alarms. They're just not going unless, like he said, it's a verified alarm. And now that's where our monitoring side is showing that this is verified. We see people moving on property.
But then that's where that glass break, that confirms. That's why it's a little bit.
Those could be false too. Those could be false too. It's just.
But those will be false, Josh, mostly during thunderstorms and things like that when there's, because they're sensing.
Right.
But now how do we mitigate false alarms? Through the sensor chapter?
Yeah.
Dual technology sensors.
Yep.
Glass breaks, because when glass breaks, what happens to the pressure in the room? It changes.
Yep.
So you can get those, but those cost more money.
A lot of money.
But the reason I brought up the Kelsey home and the things, those were targeted by professionals. But when you listen to the news accounts, what'd they say? Yeah, they're looking at enhancing their cameras and their security system.
That's no good.
They're still not addressing the problem.
Yeah.
How'd they get in?
Yeah.
So we've built several homes with security in mind. The physical security was the first component that we addressed. Yep. It's the foundation. It's the foundation of any strategy in a residence. But yet it's the one that's the least.
There's a chapter in the physical security part, Coop, that is about the structures, about walls, about ceilings,
and
it's pretty detailed.
And Josh, how many pages is it?
That one, that physical security, I want to say was close to 700 pages.
Wow!
Just that one book. I think it was the fattest book.
Yeah, it was the fattest.
Is that the fattest?
It's just 500.
Is it 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
It was a lot. It was a lot.
Just on that one.
In my brain, it was 1,000 pages, Mike.
Yeah.
Because you're the old guy.
Yeah. No, he said he had a pea brain.
Yeah, I do.
We maxed that one out in that chapter.
So we talked a little bit. You talked a little bit earlier about how when you took the test versus when he took the test, how it's evolved. Do you think that CPP test certification will continue? It's going to have to continue to evolve with the times and the new systems.
What he's telling you is the test that I took was way harder than the test that he took. I'm joking. I'm just trying to take some credit.
It was more difficult. When I came through, I didn't have any of the books. I went through study guides.
Yeah.
And that's all that our chapter certification representative had at the time. And I passed it barely.
So the difference between the two tests, though, have you seen the new test versus the test you took?
Oh yeah.
Has it evolved content wise?
Oh yes.
With the times, so it's going to have to continue to evolve that way to stay relevant.
What you talked about, the evolution of where the security is going, it's constantly changing. When you talk about what we talked about in 2016 compared to today, can change completely.
World's different.
World different.
Yeah.
And it's going to continue to evolve in that direction. The active shooter violence and the targeted violence is what we're seeing increased. But that's why this exam becomes so much more prevalent in our profession, because it's covering 7 different disciplines, and they're applying principles, and that's what you need to apply to the strategies to help mitigate the risk to your customers and your clients and your employer.
And unfortunately, usually it takes something bad happening. You know, when you're too young, but when Mike and I, you know, we're getting on a plane.
I believe you were in grade school when I was on the street. They don't, you know, Jeremy Bain and Terry don't call me the Godfather for nothing.
So when me and this bag of dust were getting on planes prior to 2000, the attacks of September 11th, it was different then, Josh. It was different. It's still not good enough, and I think we all know that. But it was different. That's what sucks. Is things.
I
you know,
remember.
the response to Columbine, they formed a perimeter and waited for SWAT, and it's just not that way anymore.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not that way anymore. Everything has to evolve. And when you're talking about, to his point, when you're talking about a profession with these 7 different disciplines, you have 7 different disciplines that are evolving constantly. So that you got to keep up with.
And Josh, none of those texts are no less than 200, 300 pages.
Yeah. And those are,
And there's seven books.
7 total books.
And then 4 guidelines and 4 standards.
And they revise them constantly because my set of books actually had COVID in it. It actually had oh yeah, no, they were that up to date. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it actually had pandemic response in it.
The guidelines and standards will be probably more up to date because ASIS has spent a lot more time in those, in updating those because they're easier relevant. The texts are a little bit more difficult.
Okay. All right. So before we wrap this up and let you go enjoy the rest of your day and your Friday and your weekend,
Well, what makes you think I'm not enjoying this now?
because you're sitting here with him and me.
He loves this shit.
Yeah, but he's sitting here with us.
Look how happy he is.
I just figured you had enough of him.
Well, I may have been thinking it, but I didn't say it.
So, for those who are thinking about getting CPP, what are some words of wisdom that you can give them? Are there things that they can do ahead of time that would help them in that endeavor, or is there anything that you can think of that would help prepare them for the difficulties of what it is?
So, in order to even sit for the examination, you have to meet a certain set of criteria. At least have like 7 years minimum requirement in security field, of some related field like law enforcement, private security, somewhere along those lines. The key phrase and criteria that they use is what's called 3 years of responsible in charge. Well, what does that mean? Basically, the work that you've done for the last 3 years is independent of a supervisor's review. You've either managed people or you've pretty much had your own consulting firm or something along those, but you've been in some form that simulates a managerial director job, something along those lines that shows that you've also managed projects or people. And how you phrase that in your application is important to get through to even sit for the exam. So Josh, just to even take it, had to submit an application which was reviewed, and he had to get it. Who co-signed your application?
I think it was Ryan.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it was Ryan. Yeah.
So that's the first thing I ask anybody, Coop, is where are you at in your career? Let's take a look at the responsible in charge. And then we get you started in reading the text. And pretty much we start with those disciplines that represent the greatest majority of the body of knowledge that you're going to need to know. Physical security, security management. Well, I got them right here. What are the top biggest ones? I forgot what
business
they were.
principles, crisis management.
Security principles and practices, business principles and practices, physical security, crisis management. Information security has gone up to 14%.
Yeah.
Since you've taken the exam.
Yeah.
So we start with those, and I also tell individuals to start delving into the guidelines and the standards, because once you become a member of ASIS, those are available for free online, so you can access those. But Josh, what did you notice as you started reading through all those texts there was a repetitive nature. If you sit back, Coop, and you look at the body of knowledge you got to read through. But then once you get into it, what do you start to see?
There's patterns. There's definitely and you've already brought it up. You said it about the residential stuff. It's what are you trying to protect? I would say the overall end all be all is what are you trying to protect? Because you have to get people to stop. You have to get them to stop and sit there and think, what am I trying to protect here?
To step back, take a broad look. What are we working with? What do I have to work with? Take an evaluation before making recommendations. So that's important.
And when you're talking about a company like us with different departments and different stakeholders and different people who are in charge of that asset is theirs. They own that. That's the way they use the language in that. Who owns the asset?
Right.
Is what I would think is the most important thing for us to protect is probably not going to be what Sean Burns, our director of technology, is going to be. So what the reading suggests is you take all asset owners and you mix them together to find out what everybody's trying to protect. And when you're talking about an entity like this, if you're talking about a home, you're talking about the whole family. What are we trying to protect here? Of course, people, like you said, but then there's secondary concerns and third.
Okay. Fantastic. Just wealth of knowledge to both of you, mainly him.
I was going to say
gonna
that
pay
too,
for
there,
that.
Coop.
A lot of these comments that I'm digging in, I'm going to pay for.
Yeah, I know. You see, I want you to envision this. When I started all this, he was in like grade school.
Diapers, maybe?
Would you say 86?
86.
I was 11.
Oh, see, almost. He just got out. Of
86. I don't want to say anything because I don't want to make you feel bad.
No, don't say
No, I
You're gonna make us
don't.
both
You
feel
said
bad.
something earlier. You want to say anything? No, I just no.
But you wanted to. I could tell.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
100%. Well,
Mike, thanks for
Thank you.
seriously,
No, it's my
dude.
pleasure.
Yeah, you did us
My
a solid
pleasure.
with this.
Absolutely, thank you. It's a wealth of knowledge for those of you who are watching this and debating on whether or not you want to continue your education into a CPP. Absolutely, the broad spectrum, I believe, would be fantastic knowledge.
And I've busted his chops, but seriously, in our area, he's kind of our guru when it comes to that.
Here's the other thing, Coop. The vast majority of the study sessions I take, the general census, or general, what am I looking
Consensus?
for? No, not consensus. General pattern is he's rare. The most people that come through the study session never either take it or they may not fail it once and then walk away. The reason I stick to the original source material is that if you come to one of my study sessions, we get you in directly into the books. So at least you come away with some value. That
You get something.
You get something out of that where you know to find the material. Because the vast majority of the people that come to my sessions never sit for the exam.
I remember telling Ryan Smith when I was the very first book. I started with a book I knew the least about, and so
You were ready to quit, weren't you?
I was.
Yes.
I picked business principles because it was what I knew the least about, and I started reading it. And I made it through about halfway through that book, and Smith comes by my office and said, "How's it going?" I said, "I'll say this: it's maddening, but even just reading this, I'm taking something away from it that's helpful." Yeah.
So Chris Walker that wrote that particular text, I wish you could have met him.
Yeah.
You want to talk about somebody that had a passion for security in business? He was a phenomenal resource.
Was he the one out of TCU?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
Yeah. See, I paid attention.
Somewhat. I explicitly remember a lot of people in there helping you, guiding you, and being like, "This is what you need to know."
Thank Mike for putting up with you and I for a while.
Mike, seriously,
It
though,
was my
thank you
pleasure.
so much. I really appreciate you devoting the time to us and coming out. Fantastic. Wealth of knowledge. For those of you looking for it, please reach out to Mike. He's our go-to guru. He's the guy that's going to get you set up properly. So, again, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to let you guys get to your weekend. Thank you guys for stopping by and hanging out with us while we do this. Enjoy your weekends, and we will catch you guys on the next one.
Thanks so
you, and
much.
stay safe.